You know, I've been around since the Dead Sea was only sick. If I were dating today, they'd call it carbon dating. I've been around since bulls were bullets. Bullets? At my age, I don't take a chance on a green banana. I don't know about you, but I had a discussion with my wife about living wills. And I told her I didn't want to be in a vegetative state hooked up to a machine sucking on a bottle. So she had me stand up, she pulled the plug on the TV, and she took away my beer. Some of you women can identify with that, can't you? So anyway, my mom used to drive me nuts to get my sister Rosalie married, and I decided the next time she called me, I'm going to make it funny. So she calls me one day, she says, Avery, I'm going to give you $500 if you can get Rosie to go out with Max Vafufnik. I said, Ma, for $500, I'll go out with Max Vafufnik. She says, that's not funny. So I called Rosie up and I said, Rosie, how'd you like to make $250? We both laughed. I was dating a woman from Chicago. She came to Denver. We were having breakfast together. My mother had a long conversation with her. I couldn't hear it. So after it's over, I said to this woman, so what did my mother say to you? She says, he was trying to convince me of what a good catch you were. And she says, he's just like a doctor. He has his own office. I thought that was hysterical. You heard about the talking about Jewish mothers, a Jewish fellow became president of the United States, called his elderly Ma, he said, Ma, I just became president. I'd like you to come to the inauguration. She says, you know I don't like your travel. Ma, we'll send Air Force One for you. It's not a problem. Where will I stay? You'll stay at the White House with us. So she goes under protest. She's sitting in the audience, and there up on the stage is her son and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. She taps the fellow on the shoulder and says, you see that guy there? His brother is a doctor. When I think of Jewish mothers, I think of psychiatrists. Wonderful story about a fellow goes to a psychiatrist 3 times a week for 15 years. Finally says to the psychiatrist, I think I can handle it myself. He's a Jewish fellow, a Jewish psychiatrist. 6 months later, the psychiatrist gets a frantic phone call. He says, I woke up in a cold sweat. I dreamt you were my mother. You think I've gone through all these years with my mother? He says, set an appointment. We'll talk about it. He comes in, he says, now what was the dream? It wasn't a dream. It was a nightmare. I dreamt you were my mother. You think I've gone through all these years? He says, we can figure that out. Let's figure out what you did that day. He says, it was an ordinary day. He says, what did you do? He says, I got up at 7 o'clock. He says, then what did you do? He says, I went to breakfast. He says, what'd you have for breakfast? Coffee and a donut. He says, you call that a breakfast? So that reminds me of all the funny stories about sex. One old guy is with his elderly wife, and the wife says, Shmuel, let's go upstairs and make love. He says, at my age, it's one or the other. Old lady goes to a doctor, and the doctor says, you know, Mrs. Schwartz, I've been reading your articles on sex for the aged person. They've been wonderfully done. I'm kind of curious, being your physician, you don't have to answer this, but how's your own sex life? Well, I'm going to tell you the truth, my husband doesn't like sex. If you don't have, he says, Mrs. Goldberg, you're in luck, we have a new pill. You pop one of these in this coffee immediately preceding a meal, and your husband will enjoy the sanctity of lovemaking. 2 weeks later, he sees Mrs. Goldberg on the street. He says, Mrs. Goldberg, how are you? She says, just fine. Mrs. Goldberg, how'd the pills work? She said, how'd they work? I didn't think they'd work at all. I put 3 pills in the coffee. Just before this is what happened. What happened? This guy knocks everything off the table. We make love right there on the table for 2 hours. Doctor says, wonderful. She says, wonderful. We can go back to that restaurant again.